Azure Governance. Jay?
All right, can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just let me just start sharing my screen and then we'll go from there. All right. So hopefully you can see my screen now. So thanks for joining. Thanks, Tim. Sorry, I was actually just coming off of another meeting, so a little bit of scramble here. Sorry for that. But hopefully everybody is settled down. And thanks again for waiting. Um, so today we are going to talk about Azure governance, right? So basically, when you are doing Azure, like usually when people start consuming cloud for some time, there is an initial ramp up space where people started take workloads and they start putting it into Azure. Afterwards, there is always some data sprawl, applications go out of control, cost management issues come up, there is governance, compliance issues. So that's where we actually just go back and look at it. And some guys are always better; they actually do it upfront. And there are some people who actually come back and then do the inspection and then correct the course and things like that. Sometimes it is difficult to do the management at the beginning because there is going to be a lot of work going on. Developers wanted flexibility, so there is always this balance of control versus speed. So we will just talk about some of those aspects of governance today. How do we organize subscriptions to minimize subscription sprawl and track costs, and how increase security by implementing least privilege access? How do we minimize outages by preventing accidental resource deletions? And some of these things, these are some of the common motivations behind doing governance. So, well managed and well architected applications will improve flexibility, improve resiliency, availability, and also reduce security threats. Um, Now, I think you guys are all familiar with this slide. This has been shown many times from Microsoft folks. If you look at any Microsoft cloud environment in a data center, underneath everything you have the infrastructure, which is physical assets, the servers and the wiring and everything. And on top of that, we have the virtualization tier, which is the IaaS, or infrastructure as a service. Basically, it constitutes server space like the compute services, the storage services, and the networking services. So we actually provide servers to you from this tier. So that is the IaaS tier. And all the other services like PaaS services are built on top of these IaaS services. And again, there are common applications or common services called on the side of this diagram. You have two pillars there: security and management and hybrid operations. So PaaS services are actually services that are delivered to you to do some deployment or some application, like a solution architecture. But then, for your management experience, we provide you security and operations. Those are all those main aspects. Like one of the design philosophies of Microsoft, we actually want to have these tiers available across the board. Like we don't want to have these tools to be only applicable to Azure. We want to make sure that it is very hybrid, such that you can manage your on-premise environment or assets that are sitting in other clouds using this common management services. So that actually helps you to do much better governance, such that you have the same tools, same place, and see things at a common platform. All right, so let's look at the cloud management platform. So basically, we start any organization will start with the migration process. Once they migrate into cloud, there is a full life cycle of things that we do. We have to secure, protect, monitor, configure, and govern. And again, some new migrations happen, and the cycle will go on. So we'll focus our attention on the governance aspect. And so from a high-level governance structure, this is how the Azure hierarchy looks like. Maybe everybody is familiar with this. So you have, if you're from an organizational perspective, when some customer is coming into Azure, they sign up in enterprise enrollment. And that is managed in a separate portal called ea.azure.com. And those enrollments actually sometimes they can be a pre-commit, like they pay money up front and all these consumptions will be taken off of that, or it could be a pay-as-you-go type enrollment. Once the enrollment is done, then you can actually create these tiers called departments, accounts, and subscriptions. The subscriptions are available in the portal. Everything above that is actually usually managed in the EA portal, and department is an optional, classification there. Accounts are required, fields. So once you have subscriptions, you are assigning a subscription to an account. How you define these things is very much depending on your organization. You can actually have accounts split by geographies or initiatives or organizations or anything like that. So all those things will happen, and based on the organizational hierarchy. So a subscription is an administrative boundary for your Microsoft Azure. It is out of the box building a level of granularity, and also it is a out of the box technical boundary for several things. So for example, when you put things in a subscription, then you're not by default not going to interoperate with other subscriptions unless you provide those channels, like basically open up the communication. And the subscriptions also come up with quotas actually. So that's something that sometimes we always think about. How we are organizing is depending on several of these factors. Sometimes subscriptions has, like, you can have n number of virtual machines in one subscription. You cannot go beyond that. So that's also a consideration when how you organize. And there are different roles coming up in the subscription, in the administration. So there are enterprise administrators who are actually doing in the EA portal, then the department owner, the same hierarchy which I was telling, and account owner, and a service administrator. I'm not going to go too far into that. I just wanted to give you some reference to all that. I think maybe I will skip these things. Okay, now let's look at the management groups for enterprises. So when we build subscriptions in Azure, subscriptions are, you can apply policies, blueprints, and things like that into a subscription. And sometimes it happens that you have some development subscriptions, like there is a project A and a project B, and they may have different subscriptions for development. And there are production subscriptions. And within production, you may have applications that require different levels of security. For example, there may be a financial application that requires much more compliances, and there may be a document management application that requires less scrutiny. Like there may be revenue generation applications versus standard internal applications. So those are probably may have different policies or different levels of eyes looking at it. For that, we create management groups. Management groups is actually, it can be hierarchically arranged. You can have one management group under another management group. But management groups actually combine subscriptions for the ease of policy management. Basically, you take a couple of subscriptions and put under one management group, and then you can apply policies at the management group level so that all the subscriptions under that will get inherit all that policies. So this is another way of organizing it, because your subscriptions is pretty much dependent on your usage pattern, right? But different parts of the organization may have a common policies that you may want to apply. If you are going to apply policies, then it's difficult to go after each subscription and apply the same policies multiple times and then management groups gives that sort of an assimilation of things that you can do it the policies at ease. Now let's look at a little bit of the resource management. I think probably a lot of people know this, so I will not cover take too much of time here. So resource groups, resource providers, resource group templates, and roles-based access control. So a resource in Azure is the fundamental entity that you create. It could be a virtual machine, a storage account, or a database, or whatever it is. And resource group is the folder per se. Like, it's not really a folder, but it is like the container that holds everything that you create under the resource group. And resource providers, like, there are several resource providers that that actually build the resources that you're asking for. Like, there is a resource provider for compute. There is a resource provider for storage. So when you are creating a virtual machine, your request for creating a virtual machine is hitting a compute resource provider. So sometimes they create new resource providers. When there is a new service coming up, there may be a new resource provider for that. That's why sometimes you might have seen that you have to register for a resource provider, because by default it may not be enabled for you. And you can also restrict people from using some resources by not allowing resource providers for those guys, right? So, and then resource group templates. So when you wanted to deploy resources off of templates, you can actually code those in a JSON format and then give to the Azure service ARM provider, and then you can run it and create those. And role-based access control is how you actually give access to people to access these resources. Now, I actually mentioned this before, like there is the management groups on the top level where you can add subscriptions under the management group. Even though, so basically when you build these things, management groups are not there. It is an after the fact, capability. Or for example, you don't really need a management group to create subscriptions. Subscriptions are there. Then you create a management group and arrange or associate subscriptions under that. So after that, you can have this hierarchy where there is management group, there are subscriptions under that, there are resource groups under that, and resources under that. So, and then the policies can be applied at different levels. There is a scope for the policies. The policies can be applied at the management groups, or at the subscriptions, or at the resource groups. I think even at the resources. So that's how you granularly control what type of policies you want to apply or governance you want to apply. These are some of the resource providers that I mentioned before. Like in the compute, there are resource providers for virtual machines, then storage. In the network group, you have resource providers for load balancers and many more like that. Then resource groups, everybody knows that. And resource tags. So when in a well-governed environment, there is always a best practice to put resource tags for your environment. Resource tags are important that it will give some clue around what application it is belonging to, what is the type of the asset, who is in charge of that, what is the cost center. There are some standard set of tags that you may want to put for every resource that you have. If you think about the CMDB database in on-premises, like people will have their configuration management database for organizing their business applications, their IT application, and then whatever it is, and then the tier of the application, for example, the front end tier or the middle tier or the back end tier, and the component level tagging, for example, database or something like NoSQL or whatever it is. Like so basically you can have different levels of tagging. So one of the benefits of doing tagging is that you can use the tags to run and find out costing based on the tags. Let's say how much this cost center is costing us. So we can run a billing report on the tag which is equal to cost center something, and those kind of features available. So that is actually also a good practice to have tags for everything, which gives a variety of benefits. So resource tags tips, like you can have environment, dev, test, prod, then you can have by role, web, cache, database, departments, and then tag by responsible party and all that. Like, and then you can even tag with the contact numbers and all that. So if something happens, then immediately you'll be able to have that access. Standard recommended tags. These are some of the tags. Actually, there is a bunch of documentation in Azure for Azure. If you go and look at it, you will have tags around all these things. Basically provides you some best practices around how to tag. Let's look at access role-based control. So everybody is familiar with role-based control. Allows secure access to the access to your assets and gives you granular permissions, and it can be assigned to groups, to users, groups, and service principals. So you can have a role, and it can be assigned to a single user. Like let's say a user can be a subscription contributor, or it can be a group who can be a subscription contributor. So in that scenario, anybody who is part of the group will get that role. And a service principal is almost like a system account. In traditional terms, it's called a system account, where you wanted to have to run a batch process or a backend application. So there is no user involved, but then you will have to run it based on a service account. So you can also associate roles with service principals. For example, if you're running an Azure batch, like an Azure automation process, and it is going to access some of the assets that you have, and it needs those access rights to perform those operations. So you can provide these role-based access control to service principals as well. There are built-in roles that make it easy to get started. There are a bunch of Azure roles. For example, there is every subscription comes with a owner role, contributor role, and a reader role, and a bunch of other roles. Then there is, if you create a virtual machine, there are roles associated with the virtual machines. For example, virtual machine operator, who can shut down and start and restart and cannot do anything else, and things like that. So you can also create custom roles. I'll talk about those in the next slides. So there are two key concepts around roles. There is a role definition and a role assignment. The role definition means what are the characteristics of the role, what it provides you, what is allowed and what is not allowed. And the role assignment is like who gets those permissions. And so you have a role definition which comes standard, or you can create one of those. And then the assignment is you take one of those and assign to a user or a group, so that that person will get those roles. Now, every Azure subscription has role-based access control that is actually coming off of the Active Directory. The users and the groups and everything is present in the Active Directory. And the Azure subscription actually provides the roles for the users that are belonging to the Active Directory. And so the access inheritance, like if there is a role assigned with a user has a role in a subscription, the user will have the same role inherited into the child components, a resource group or resource. If I have a contributor access to a subscription, I will have a contributor access to a resource group and any resource under that. So that's the inheritance of the roles. So there are built-in roles. I mentioned about that. The owner who can actually manage everything, including access, contributor, and a reader. So there is also this is the inheritance. I told you that there is if you have a subscription, then there are resource groups and resources, and all these things flow from the top to the bottom. That is access inheritance. And there are a bunch of roles that comes by default. If you wanted to look at the list, there's already documentation around that. For example, from the data side, there is a SQL DB contributor, and then there is SQL Security Manager, all kinds of roles coming up, virtual machine contributor. So you can restrict people's access, limited to that, to resources, and not really to the entire subscription. There are custom roles. I mentioned about that. So you can actually create a custom role like this. It's a JSON template. So actually, I'm creating a role called a virtual machine operator. I kind of misspoke last time. The virtual machine operator is a custom role that I created. So you can create an ID for that, and then just provide what it allows. The actions that can be allowed are the storage read, storage network read, virtual machine start, virtual machine restart, all kinds of things like that. And then no actions, you can actually also fill in the actions that are not allowed, and assignable scopes. And this means that this role can be assigned at a subscription level only. So basically, you cannot go in and assign this role at a resource group level or anything like that, or a management group or whatever. And again, you can give the subscription ID there. So basically, only those subscriptions will get this role. And then and then the next step is like you take some people or a group, and then you will see when you go into that subscription, you will see these roles, and then you can take that role and then assign to a person or a group. All right, so that was all about the fundamental aspects, some of the terminologies and stuff that I wanted to cover. Now let's talk about a little bit more on the governance. Like I mentioned before that, governance is all about the balance between speed and control. In the new world, everybody is going agile and cloud, and there is always the need for there is a competition between speed and control. Like the developers want speed, but the IT operations and IT management wants control as well. And the business also wants speed. So there is always this conflict. And we wanted to make sure that a lot of these things are self-managed and automated such that we get the speed and the control at the same time. If everything is managed by a person, then obviously you're not going to achieve that any time. So in the modern governance, we will have the speed is achieved by there are several tools that we provide. One is called blueprints, which actually provides a set of definitions for the scope that you provide, that you choose. It could be the subscription or a management group or a resource. You can actually stamp out something called a blueprint, and it comes up with the templates, role-based access controls and policies. Like when you create a resource off of a resource, such as a resource or a subscription based on a blueprint, it is already stamped out. It is coming off of a template. Like it will have a certain. It will automatically run some ARM template, so it will pre-create a lot of the things that you want to do, so that everybody is not doing that by their own. And it comes up with the standard roles and policies. Like so, let's say if that subscription cannot create a GPU-enabled virtual machine, that's already set in the subscription. So basically, with the blueprints, you can actually set up all these policies upfront, so that nobody is going to mess around with that. It's not like you just create a very simple out of the box plain vanilla subscription. It is actually coming up with already set up policies and roles associated with that. Those are called the blueprints. And then I mentioned about the management groups. Management group is an individual, is a group of subscriptions, and it is also a tool that we can always use in creating blueprints and policies and all that. And the cost management and the resource graph are some of the tools that we'll use for cost management, as well as looking at people, their access controls and everything. So the policy on the left side, you see, there is a Azure feature called Azure Policies. What Azure Policies provides is a definition of what is allowed and what is not allowed. The policies comes in different flavors. One is called the audit policy. So the audit policy means like once you have deployed, it is actually the after the fact policy. Like once you have a set of resources in your environment, the audit policy goes and inspects everything and see if there is any violation. Let's say you say that you are not allowed to deploy anything in Eastern Europe or something like that. The audit policy scans through all the things you have and then gives you notifications. If you go into the policy page, there will be like a policy violation line item, which will say that this particular resource is not compliant, and so you will have a compliance score and things like that. And there are other policies called deny policies, where it actually that is more proactive type policy. When you're trying to install something or create something, this policy kicks in and then say, okay, you are not even allowed to deploy this. So when you create blueprints, you can actually create policies upfront like that and then associate with the subscription. So when you create another subscription based off of the blueprint, then all these policies will by default will apply to that subscription as well. So this is the way when you have multiple project teams, multiple locations, and you wanted to have a standardized approach, then you create policies and associate with the subscriptions and provide to people so that they start off with the baseline set of governance from the get-go. And I mentioned about management groups, so I won't go further into that. So how does governance, what does governance mean? Governance means that you should be able to quickly search and find resources across your organization and relationships. That's one of the things that we mentioned about tagging and best practices around naming conventions and all that. So you should be able to have that sort of a high level understanding and query based exploration of your resources. It should be easily searchable and findable. And the second thing is policy enforcement. You want to make sure that you have a consistent set of policies across everything that you have. And the third one is subscription governance. And so you have easy way of creating subscriptions, which are based off of blueprints. And also you have DevOps in practice. So everything that you do need not be manual. It has to be, abstracted out, and then you will have processes that are DevOps friendly. And then the last part of it is like monitoring the cloud spend and providing accountability and optimizations. So that is all about cost optimization. The first one is all about ease of operations, and the second and third ones are around more management, and the last one is about optimization. So basically you have several maturity levels of governance. All right. So Azure policy, I think I already mentioned a little bit about this. So it actually provides the enforcement and compliance at large scale. So if you're trying to do policies at a smaller scale, then you will have to go and watch each person what he's doing, and then trying to run reports and just to say that okay, this is out of compliant. So policies is the backend engine that is providing that service for you. It can run at a scale and can run at management groups level as well. So it can also do remediation steps, like remediation steps in the sense it can prevent you from doing stuff, or you can even use some auditing reports. And there are different types of policies. There is something called append policies. So basically, let's say tagging is a good example of that. Like let's say there is supposed to be common set of tags that you want to have, right? Let's say cost center or something like that. If people are not providing that when they create their resources, the append policies kick in, and then it will automatically supply those parameters and by default values. So that you can create those kind of policies. And deny policy is obviously not allowing to create if it doesn't meet certain criteria. And audit policies is actually about after the fact. It doesn't prevent you from doing anything, but it actually comes back and inspects everything that you have and then gives notifications. And if not exist is more like auto deployment. Like basically if that particular group or resource group or some scope doesn't have some item, it can actually go and then auto deploy that. So this will mean that you will have some templates and then the deployment steps coded into that, and also some service account for like a service principal for having rights to do that. So those are the 4 types of policies that we usually have. So the resource graph actually gives access to all resource information. Basically, this is a graphical, this is like a graph API tool where you can go and then type in commands and then you can browse through all the resources you have. It gives you some more drill down and analytical type process that you can use for all your resources. Sometimes it is not very easy to look at everything that you have through the portal. So the resource graph actually provides a quick scripted portal for you to allow to navigate to all these. Then I will not cover the roadmap part. Go further. Azure policies for enterprise level compliance, like enforcement and compliance, and policies at scale and remediation. So basically, this is more around the capabilities of policies and how big organizations use that. So it's an enterprise level scalable tool that everybody can use to manage across their enterprise. So this is a screenshot of how the policy will look like. So when you go into the screen, then this is a view of what is not compliant and what is compliant and all that. This is more about an auditing policy. So it will tell you how many of them are good and how many are bad. And then you can go and drill down on each of those and then do some actions around that. So this is another view where it is called deny policy. So when you're trying to create a virtual machine which is not allowed, then it will say validation failed. So basically, if the policy was not there, it will pass this step. But if this is more like for a development and operations person, this is how it will manifest. The previous slide was around operations guys who are looking at what is compliant and what is not compliant. This is all about the creation time. Yeah, so it's more explanation of what is coming out of that. There is some automation or like animation around how this works. So basically, when the user is trying to put something in by invoking the ARM process, the Azure Resource Manager, the Azure policy kicks in and then inspects, and if it is bad, it will drop it. And if the resource request comes in, the Azure, if it is allowed, the policy is allowed, it will create it. And it always keeps watching it, like it is all about the auditing. Even if it is created, then it is going and coming back and looking at it from an audit perspective later on. All right, so the way policies are written is like there are some logical operators, like not all of and any of these conditions, and then if it is equal to or like same like it's all JSON, but you have some operations and conditions and fields, and the effects are like whether you can allow it, deny it, audit, all those things. This is an example definition. So it is telling that if there is no tags called cost center in the tag field, then deny. So it will not allow you to deploy this policy, deploy whatever asset that it is. If the cost center tag is not available, deny this execution. There are some other examples I will. So if you wanted to look at policies, there is already a GitHub repo of all the policies. You can go ahead and then import some of those policies and enforce those. And there are 2 types of policies. Azure comes with the basic set of policies, and and custom policies. Custom policies is what you can write, and you can also import from a repo like this. I think I'll go for, I think I'll just think there's too much of explanation here. I think we already covered all this. Okay, now let's talk about Azure Blueprints. So Azure Blueprints provides you quick creation of governed subscriptions. So with allowing cloud engineers to construct and govern enterprise cloud environments for multiple application teams. So basically, it provides you certain. I think in the next slide, it provides you all the components that can be managed through the blueprints. It can provide policies, networking, RBAC, and runbooks, all kinds of things stamped into one blueprint. So once you create the blueprint, you can pick and choose any of these things and then and save it. And then you can apply that blueprint into a management group or a subscription. Sorry, it cannot be applied to a management group. It can be applied to a subscription. I'm sorry, I take it back. It can be applied to subscription management group, and then everything that you write it down will apply to that. So, if it is an RBAC control, so basically, the roles and definitions of the of access controls will come into that subscription. Then you can actually have policies written down, and those also will get tagged into that subscription. Then you can have certain functions and runbooks, like some automation that also goes to this to the subscription. So when you create a subscription based off of this policies for this blueprints, and actually everything is set from the beginning, and so you don't have to write to create all of them later on. I think we should go in. Yeah, so this is how it looks like in the Azure portal. So there is a blueprint feature. So when you first you do is getting started, and then you create a blueprint. And after that, you can select the owner of the blueprint and then the name of the blueprint. And then the second part is the artifacts. So you can take the different types of artifacts and assign into the blueprint. It could be a network. So you always say that this blueprint has a VNet with the 2 subnet templates. So you can assign that to this blueprint, and you can also have other things. So it picks up some of those available samples which you can take from, and then you can assign to that. And you can also take RBAC templates and assign it, and then tags, the cost center, and other things that you want to assign to every resource in this blueprint, and then review and create it. And once that is created, then you can apply this into a scope. Basically, the first part of that was the definition of the blueprint. And then second part of it is the assignment, the scope assignment, where you take the blueprint and then assign to a subscription here. Then after that, the blueprint is ready for that subscription. And so you can so actually, basically, it will remove things that are not available to be created in that subscription. This is basically how the blueprint is blocking some of the things that not allowed. So blueprint actually comes up with that policies. So you go and search for in the marketplace the resources that are available. Some of them already has been blocked out because of the blueprint. And then now let's talk about resource locks. I think you guys may be familiar with this. This is again, we do locks to protect from accidental deletion, primarily for production workloads. There are 2 types of locks, cannot delete and read only. So this is pretty much set up on, say, a virtual machine, and we don't want to have that to be accidentally deleted, or like a database or whatever. So we can actually put locks such as cannot delete, and also can be read only. Like basically no modifications to that resource can be done. So the locks can also be applied at subscription or resource group or a resource. And then locks are also inherited by child resources, which means that if you apply a lock at a resource group level, then all the resources under the resource group level will also inherit those locks. And one of the cool features in Azure is called DevTest Labs. I think most developers may be familiar with this. So when we are going to do POC type work, usually, working on a development subscription is costly, and you wanted to have, and management wise it is difficult. So a DevTest lab actually creates a controlled environment. It actually creates certain roles, and just like when you are, like, let's say you're going for a lab, like a course or something, and then they create a lab environment for you. At the end of the day, the lab will be refreshed, and then everything will be taken down, and might be claimed by other persons and things like that. So the lab environment is pretty much like that. Basically, there is a lab owner and the lab users. What it gives you is a set of starter policies for doing these kind of jobs. For example, there are some developers who wanted to like play with stuff. It is really not in development. Again, they are doing some research work, but they don't want to spend a lot of money on that. But in that scenario, they will create a dev test lab, and the labs come up with auto shutdown policies, and it will be idle when it will be shut down when people are not using for certain time frames. And then the lab owner can actually delete stuff, and then they can reassign to other people. So there are some things that they can do within the lab, the scope of the lab. So that's another cool way of controlling cost, and then doing quick POC type work. Yeah, it's a worry-free self-service. It's a fast provisioning, integrating with the existing tool chains and built-in policies. Like you mentioned, auto shutdown allows lab owner to easily manage the labs. So this is almost, there is nothing different about Azure DevTest Labs. It is all the resources that Azure provides, but it comes up with a preset set of policies and controls that allows you to quickly manage and kill the environment and then reclaim everything without incurring. Otherwise, if you are allowing people to do work in a standard subscription, they may be creating stuff everywhere. And eventually it may become like difficult to manage and track and what they did and delete all this stuff, right? So this gives a kind of enclosed space where whatever they're doing is contained. The Azure Cost Management, I think people might have used this already. It gives you a good experience on getting Azure costs under control. You can have several types of reports. The reports can be on a daily basis, or an accumulated basis, on a monthly basis, and then you can also drill down to resource levels, and you can also set up some budgets and alerting, and this also integrated with Azure Advisor. And Azure Advisor is another feature that provides you advices, like in several areas. It could be an advice on cost, it could be advice on performance, on networking, different types of advisors. So Azure Cost Management actually provides inputs to the Azure Advisor, so that it will say, okay, your cost can be controlled by doing, let's say, reserved instances for these kind of, so n number of servers are can be cut down by using reserved instances and all that. So there is cost analysis as part of the cost management. So you can group, filter, and use date ranges and monthly gain, and you can save these reports and run it again, and integrate it with the budgets. So you can also set up budgets. Budgets will set up a top limit for your spending for a certain period of time, and then you can create notifications. If it is like reaching 25% of your budget, then give me a notification, or 50%. Like, you can hear multiple steps of alerts can be set up for cost analysis. So that actually is another feature in the cost management. And cost management support for cross clouds. So we can actually, currently it's in preview, but I think you can analyze your costs across Azure and AWS. I think there are some connectors available. I haven't done that, but it's possible. I feel it's possible to get cost data coming from other sources as well. I think I mentioned about the alerts, the budget as well. So the Azure Advisor provides a free service. It actually is part of your Azure portal. If you go there, it gives you a personalized best practices and recommendations. It could be recommendations on different heads, for example, like security or performance or cost and all that. So every Azure resource has outputs that are like based on the logs, and then looking at how it is running, Azure Monitor, and all sorts of tools that are running in the background will give feeds to the advisor. The advisor will accumulate all that and then provide you different types of alerts, like advices based on the context. It could be high availability advice, or a security advice, or a cost advice, and you can actually act upon all these things, and then make sure that your environment is well managed and governed. Yeah, I think the next step is about cloud ops. Basically, once you have your environment ready, you always try to practice more development practices and operational practices which are tailored for DevOps. So always make sure that we have best practices to shut it down, or like redeploy based on if it is not being used, kill the environment. It's always like managed through a DevOps process. And with that, I think I have covered most of what I want to say today. There are some resources available and videos available. You can actually go ahead and look at all those things. There is a bunch of information that helps you to manage your environment with better control and governance. All right. Thanks,
well,
everyone.
I know that a lot of customers get out of the barn ahead of the pace and then have to go and backtrack around governance steps. But if you impose good governance right off the bat before you start implementing resources, then I think you'd be a lot better off.
That's right. Yeah. So basically, there is this whole set of mature processes that we have. There is something also called a cloud adoption framework. When new customers are coming in, they actually go through a big series of steps how to take their environment and move into cloud. It could be a migration or an adoption or like an innovation type exercise. But cloud adoption is not just about technologies. It is a marriage of people, processes, and technology. And when you go into cloud, we always want to have these things figured out at the beginning, if possible, as much as possible. For example, like there is IT operations people, there are developers. Everybody has to agree. Okay, this is the best practice that we need to adhere to from the beginning, right? So, as to your question, like it is always better to think about these things, and it is a lot of work to like. Once you have grown so much, then only thing you may be able to do is like policies that are more like auditing, and then you will have to go back and backtrace all those things and fix those things. And then I have seen people doing cost optimization exercises. There are some tools to do that. Then sometimes the cost overrun happens, and at that time, they come back and okay, we want to look at it.
Right.
Yeah.
I like that cost feature where you can look at Azure resources as well as AWS, and that's in private preview right now.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit of an old slide. I haven't checked that recently, whether it is available. There was another service called Cloud. I forgot the exact word of that. Like there was another company that we acquired, and they were actually providing across the board single cost management tools, and that's actually part of Microsoft now. And that's how the Azure AWS integration came in.
think I know the name of the tool, but like you, I'd have to go look it up because I remember it from another customer.
Yeah, it is cloud something. I forgot.
Very nice. Very nice. And a lot of these companies, like you said, not only do they get out ahead of the barn, don't have governance in place, but they're always seem to, I mean, as a cloud solution architect, I get questions from customers who don't really know how to assemble cost information. So these tools are super helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry for I was actually coming out of the meeting and I was a little bit unprepared for this call today, but hopefully
No,
yeah.
you're fine. It's a Friday. We're all going to go enjoy, the rest of our Friday afternoons. And
Yeah.
we thank you for your time, Jay.
Yeah, especially
And
coming
I'll
off
have
the
this
DTA.
recording up and online by the end of the day or Saturday. But
Yeah.
remember, I'll always post where you can find the link at aka.ms/Azure Cloud Events.
Yeah. This whole week was like the DTA and too much of
Oh, I
stuff.
know.
Yeah.
I had DTA, OpenHack. I'll go ahead and stop the recording. DTA, OpenHack, and customer calls.